this little guy stays open to let light in. And that's how we get a good picture. And that's how...
So do you remember?
Hey guys, it's Kyle Shultz Photo School, and this is my daughter Kerbi. And she has this fancy camera that she made, and she is going to be telling you about Aperture today. And so, Kerbi, tell us about this hole. Is it our big hole, our small hole, or our medium hole?
Big hole.
It's our big hole. All right, go ahead and put it in there. So what does the big hole do?
It makes a lot of light.
Say loud.
It makes a lot of light.
It makes a lot of light because it's a big hole. So all the big light comes in there, and what happens when it has a lot of light? It's a bright picture. Yep. So that's a big aperture, a big hole, a lot of light. This is which one?
A small hole.
Which one's the smaller one? Which one's the smallest? Okay, so this is the medium one. And so it lets in kind of a little bit of light, medium, and therefore makes a what? Medium brightness? Okay, that one's good. This one's the what? Tell us about this one.
It's a dark picture.
It's a dark picture. Why?
Because there's a yellow hole.
Because there's a yellow hole. Exactly. Folks, that is aperture. Aperture, there's big holes and there's small holes. The big holes let in a lot of light and make a bright picture. The little holes let in only a little bit of light and make a dark picture. All right, Kerbi, let's talk about shutter speed. So I'm going to have you put in our big hole, our big aperture, all right? That a girl. Now the whole goal of any picture is just to get light in through this hole and then into the part where the picture is recorded, right? So in this little hole is what we call a camera sensor. So I actually deconstructed a camera just to get my camera sensor. So here's a sensor that's in your camera. The whole goal of the picture is just to paint a painting on this canvas, right? We've talked about this, me and you. So here's the canvas inside of the camera. I was going to put it in there, but I've taped it so that she could actually play with it. So we'll just keep it out. And when you get light in there, there's this thing called the shutter. And I'm going to show you the shutter of an actual camera too. So here's the shutter from that same camera that I deconstructed. So the shutter has actually two curtains. So when it's a slow shutter speed, it's like click and then click, it closes off. When it's a fast shutter speed, there's actually just kind of like a tiny sliver of light. The second curtain follows the first curtain very fast. So it's kind of like goes through somewhat like that. I know that is hard to see because it's hard for my fingernails to grab this, but it kind of goes up as a tiny sliver of light. So let's see it on Kerbi's camera. Kerbi, you hold up and take a picture. Come on back here. So if Kerbi has the big lens, go ahead and hold her camera. Atta girl. So when you click the button up here, the shutter, watch your thumb. The shutter opens and lets light in to the sensor, and then it closes, just like we saw. When it's really fast, there's just a tiny sliver that opens. So here's what we do, Kerbi. If we have a big aperture, a big hole, and the shutter speed goes really fast, like this, but the picture's still too dark, then we need a slower shutter speed because we can't open up the hole anymore. We got the biggest hole we have, so then we need to leave the shutter open longer, like click, click, instead of click. So that's all shutter speed is how long this little guy stays open to let light in. And that's how we get a good picture. Okay, the last thing, Kerbi, is you can show them the camera again. Kerbi, show them the camera. The last thing is that this image sensor in here can become more or less responsive to light, and that's called ISO. Okay, Kerbi left because she gets to go pick up Traeger from school and then go swimming. She would rather do that than finish this with me, which is bogus, but I will finish. So learning to shoot in manual is simply telling your camera what aperture you want, what shutter speed you want, and what ISO you want, and that's it. It's honestly that simple. If you understand how light gets into the camera and onto this sensor, you understand exposure. Now you just got to tell your camera what values you want for each of those three things. So speaking of values, aperture is represented by an f-stop value. Now, you just have to remember that f-stops were created on opposite day. I've kind of said this for a few years now, and just it's easy to remember it that way. So the bigger the lens opening, the bigger the aperture, the smaller the f-stop number. So let's say this is f2.0. The smaller the lens opening, the bigger the f number. So let's say this is f22. And then somewhere in the middle of this would be like f8. So large aperture is a small f-stop number. Like f1.2 is a huge aperture, but it's a very low number. f36 is obviously it's one of our biggest aperture numbers, and it'd be a tiny, tiny, tiny hole. So that's how we tell our camera how big to set the lens opening. Next, we got to tell our camera how long to leave the shutter open in seconds. And so if we tell our camera, this is where it gets, it's not tricky, but if we tell our camera to set the shutter speed to 500, are we telling it to stay open for 500 seconds? No, because shutter speed is represented as 1 over x, so 1 over 500. So a shutter speed of 500 is actually 1/500th of a second. Same thing, shutter speed of 4,000 is 1/4000th of a second. Shutter speed of 25 is 1/25th of a second, and so on and so forth. And then last but not least, we have ISO, and finally this one is just proportional and makes sense. We can start at, like, say, ISO 100. That's the lowest most cameras will start. If then we move to ISO 200, we have doubled it. Do we then double the amount of light that it receives? Absolutely. All you're doing when you go from ISO 100 to 200 is you're making this sensor in your camera twice as sensitive to light. So it'll be twice as bright at ISO 200 than it was at ISO 100. And then if you move up to 400 from 200, it'll be twice as bright again. If you move from 400 to 800, again, twice as bright. So when we take our picture, we could tell our camera, I want it to be f2.0, a big lens opening. I want it to be 4,000 shutter speed, so 4,000ths of a second, and I want my ISO to be 100. What happens if the picture is too dark at those settings? 2.0, 4,000, and 100. Well, we have two options. We can either up the ISO, say we went from 100 to 400. Now we're going to have 4 times the amount of light being soaked up by the sensor. It'll be 4 times brighter. Or we could leave our ISO at 100, and we could slow down our shutter speed. So we start at 4,000ths of a second, real fast. Say we want to slow down to 1,000, 1,000ths of a second. That's 4 times slower, and that would be 4 times brighter picture. So next time we're going to be talking about how aperture directly relates to depth of field in the image. Shutter speed then has a direct effect on how motion will be captured in the picture. If motion is going to be frozen and crisp, or if it's going to have motion blur, or if it's even going to be just a shaky, blurry picture. And then last but not least, ISO has a side effect on how noisy or grainy a picture is going to be. So next video, we'll be kind of bringing it all together a little bit more, talking about the main side effects of each component of exposure, and we'll be kind of doing like a real world exercise to kind of help your mind keep wrapping around this. All right, thanks for tuning in this time, and we'll see you next time.